High in the mountains, where the ridges cut sharp against the sky and clouds moved like herds of white cattle, there lay a village that lived at the mercy of the wind. From the first breath of dawn to the last sigh of dusk, the wind was never silent. It carried snow in winter, blossoms in spring, and whispers year-round. The elders said it was alive, a spirit older than stone, and that it favored those whose hearts were clean. Every roof in the village was built slanting so the gusts would not tear them apart. Every doorway was marked with strips of cloth, fluttering like prayer flags, so that the wind might pass through as a guest instead of battering its way in. And every wedding was sealed not with a kiss alone, but with a veil blessed in the open air, so that the spirits of the mountain would know the union and guard it. Among the villagers lived a young woman named Asha. She was not the wealthiest, nor the most adorned, but her kindness shone like a hearth on the coldest nights. She tended to the goats, gathered herbs for the sick, and sang old songs while kneading bread. Wherever she went, people said the wind grew gentler, as though listening. Children tugged at her hands to tell her secrets. The old pressed her for songs of their youth. She did not think herself remarkable, but she was the sort of girl whose presence filled the empty spaces without effort. Her father, a woodcutter, had remarried after her mother's passing. His second wife brought with her a daughter, Lyra, a girl near Asha's age but nothing like her in spirit. Where Asha was quiet and attentive, Lyra was restless, her beauty edged with sharpness. She envied the way villagers leaned toward Asha, and how even the smallest kindness from her stepsister seemed to shine brighter than her own efforts. The village had long awaited Asha's betrothal, for it was said that she carried the favor of the wind. When word spread that she would marry Arun, a young herdsman strong and steady as the mountains, the people rejoiced. The day was chosen for spring, when the snows melted and the valleys filled with green. It was to be not just a wedding but a blessing for the whole village. In preparation, the elders wove a veil of extraordinary delicacy. Its threads were spun from lamb's wool and softened with river water, then left for 3 nights beneath the stars so that the wind might pass through it. Women of the village embroidered it with silver patterns shaped like swirls and wings. When at last it was finished, the veil was so light it seemed to float even on the stillest day. "The spirit of the wind will walk with her," the elders declared, and everyone nodded in agreement. But Lyra, watching from the shadows, felt her envy harden. She saw how people admired the veil, how Arun's eyes glowed when he looked at Asha, how her own presence was forgotten in the rush of preparations. Her lips tightened and she told herself, "If the wind favors Asha, then I will tear the favor from her hands." For now, though, the village hummed with joy. The mountain ridges held their breath. The wind curled around Asha as she sat by her window, sewing the hem of her gown. It tugged at her hair playfully and she smiled, whispering to it like an old friend. The days before the wedding were filled with brightness. Women carried baskets of flowers to weave garlands, children chased one another through the meadows, and the smell of roasting meats drifted through the air. Asha moved quietly among them, her hands never idle, tying ribbons, soothing a crying child, or helping her father polish the wooden benches that would seat the wedding guests. Everywhere she went, laughter seemed to follow. But Lyra saw none of this joy. She watched instead the way people's eyes lingered on her stepsister. They spoke Asha's name with fondness as if it were a charm against misfortune. Even Arun, tall and sun-browned from the pastures, seemed to light up only when Asha appeared. His voice softened, his smile widened, and though he was polite to Lyra, she felt like an invisible ghost beside them. At night, Lyra lay awake in the shared chamber, staring at the ceiling beams. Asha's soft breathing from the other bed infuriated her. She sleeps so easily as though the world has promised her safety. But what of me? Whispers of old superstitions crept into her mind. She had heard the elders say that the wind chose whom it blessed and whom it ignored. What if it had chosen Asha? What if her own life would always be shadowed, her beauty and effort wasted because the wind had turned its face away? The thought burned like an ember inside her. She began to withdraw during the day, answering curtly when others spoke to her. Yet in the shadows, her eyes were always on Asha. One afternoon, as the 2 girls fetched water from the spring, a group of village women passed by. They carried bundles of herbs and were speaking in low voices. "Asha is the very image of her mother," one of them said. "The same grace, the same sweetness. No wonder the wind loves her." "Yes," another replied, glancing at Lyra, "and not every child inherits such blessings." The word struck like a knife. Lyra clenched the bucket in her hands so tightly that water sloshed over her feet. The women meant no harm, they did not even realize the sting in their words, but to Lyra, it was proof that the village saw her as lesser, unwanted. She turned away sharply, her heart thundering. That evening their stepmother noticed her sulking and asked, "What troubles you, child?" But Lyra only shook her head. How could she confess that she felt herself dissolving, fading in her own home? That her stepmother's hopes for her, marriage into a wealthy family, respect in the village, were being stolen before her very eyes by Asha's soft smiles and kind hands? The veil was what haunted her most. Its silver embroidery shimmered like frost under moonlight, and when Asha touched it, it seemed alive. Lyra could not bear to look at it without feeling her chest tighten with fury. If that veil crowns her on the wedding day, Lyra thought, then I am nothing. I will be erased. Her envy deepened into something sharper, a secret she carried in her blood. At first she imagined small cruelties, spilling dye on Asha's gown, tangling her hair before the ceremony. But these seemed petty compared to the storm inside her. She needed something greater, something that would tear Asha's moment away and leave her trembling before the whole village. On the night before the wedding, when the household was busy with preparations, Lyra lingered by the fire. She watched Asha's hands smoothing her gown, watched her smile faintly as she traced the veil's embroidery. Arun would arrive at dawn, the feast would begin, and then Asha would walk out beneath the blessings of the wind. Lyra's heart thudded like a drum. A thought came to her, bold, dangerous, irresistible. She would wait until the moment mattered most, and then she would strike. The veil, so fragile, could be destroyed in an instant. With one tear she could snatch all joy away. As she lay down that night, her eyes fixed on the bundle of cloth folded carefully by Asha's bed, she whispered to herself, "Let us see if the wind truly loves you." The village pulsed with excitement. Children wove chains of wildflowers, women baked sweetbreads filled with honey, and the men raised lanterns on tall poles so the pathways gleamed like rivers of firelight. The air carried music from wooden flutes, faint but cheerful, drifting across the fields. By morning the entire valley would gather to witness Asha's wedding. Asha herself moved gently through the preparations, her face glowing with both nervousness and quiet joy. She carried her gown from the seamstress's hut, careful not to let the hem brush the ground, and laid it in her chamber. The dress was simple yet radiant, white cotton threaded with silver lines as though the very moonlight had been woven into its folds. On the table beside it rested the veil, delicate, light, yet shimmering with a power beyond fabric. Her friends crowded in, fussing over her hair and teasing her about Arun. "He will not recognize you," one of them laughed. "He will think the spirits themselves have sent him a bride of light." Asha blushed, covering her smile with her hand. "Do not tease. It is enough that he is kind. That is all I could ever ask." But Lyra, standing in the corner, heard every word. Her hands twisted in her lap. "Enough that he is kind?" The words scraped against her ears. Arun's kindness was a gift that should have been hers. Why did everyone believe Asha deserved it more? Later, as night deepened, the bustle faded into a quieter rhythm. Lanterns flickered low, the last trays of food were covered, and one by one the villagers went to their rest. Inside their home, Asha folded her hands in prayer, whispering thanks to her mother's spirit, to the elders, to the wind that had carried blessings upon her. She touched the veil reverently, then placed it atop her gown. "Tomorrow," she murmured, "I will wear this, and may I bring no shame upon my family." Lyra, lying with her back turned, heard it all. Her nails dug into her palm. Shame? No, there would be no shame, only ruin. When Asha's breathing softened into sleep, Lyra rose silently. The moonlight poured through the small window, painting the chamber in pale silver. She stepped closer to the bed, her shadow long upon the wall. There lay the veil, folded like a blessing, waiting to crown her sister. Lyra reached out. Her hand trembled, not from fear but from hunger, a need so fierce it felt like fire in her chest. She lifted the veil. The fabric slid coolly through her fingers, whispering like wind through reeds. For a moment she pressed it to her face, imagining how it would look upon her, how Arun's eyes might widen if she walked down the path instead. But the fantasy shattered as quickly as it formed. She knew the truth, the village would never allow it. They had already chosen Asha. Always Asha. Unless she could destroy the veil, strip Asha of the symbol that made her untouchable. Her eyes darted to the hearth. The embers still glowed faintly. One touch of flame and the veil would vanish in smoke. Her lips curled into a smile. Yet something held her back. To burn it was too easy, too clean. Better, perhaps, to strike when the eyes of the village were upon them, when Asha's moment of glory could crumble into humiliation. She folded the veil back neatly, setting it in its place. She would wait until dawn, until the drums sounded and the people gathered. Then, when all eyes were watching, she would tear it in two. The gasp, the silence, the shame, it would all belong to Asha. Returning to her bed, Lyra stared at the ceiling beams, her body rigid with anticipation. The house was silent save for the creak of wood and the sigh of the wind outside. Yet to her ears, the silence throbbed like a drum, beating toward the morning. Meanwhile, Asha dreamed. In her dream she walked along a snowy field, her veil streaming behind her like a trail of light. The wind wrapped it gently around her, whispering words she could not quite hear, but which filled her with warmth and calm. She smiled in her sleep, unaware of the storm of envy rising so close beside her. At the edge of the village, Arun sat awake, polishing the wooden cup he planned to offer Asha at the ceremony. His heart was restless, yet joyful. He did not know why, but the night air felt charged as though something unseen stirred among the stars. And so the village slept, the two sisters beneath the same roof, one dreaming of love, the other plotting ruin. The veil shimmered faintly in the moonlight, as if aware of the test it would face at dawn. Morning dawned bright, the air crisp and alive with the scent of cedar smoke and sweet bread. The village square blossomed with color. Garlands hung from poles, drums rested ready for their players, and elders in their finest robes took their seats of honor. It was the day of the wedding, and all eyes turned toward the home of the bride. Inside, Asha sat before the mirror-polished bronze that served as her reflection. Her friends braided her hair with wildflowers, their laughter tumbling like bells. The veil lay folded across her lap, shimmering faintly, ready to crown her as she stepped into her new life. Lyra stood by the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had not slept, though no one noticed. The sight of Asha glowing with happiness sharpened her envy into a blade. Each laugh that rang in her ears cut deeper. It should have been me, she thought. Why should she always shine while I am shadow? Alas, the time came. The drums began to beat outside, slow and steady like a heartbeat. Asha rose, her veil lifted with careful hands. But before she could place it on her head, Lyra stepped forward. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice the morning. The room fell silent. She snatched the veil from Asha's grasp. Gasps burst from the friends gathered around, but no one dared move. Asha's eyes widened. "Lyra, what are you doing?" For a moment, Lyra simply held it aloft, letting the morning light filter through its silver threads. The villagers waiting outside could see the movement through the open window. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. And then, with a sudden, furious motion, Lyra pulled. The fabric tore with a sound like a cry. She pulled again, ripping it across the middle. The veil, delicate yet strong, shredded under her hands until nothing remained but ragged strands fluttering between her fingers. Asha's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, clutching her chest as though the blow had struck her body instead of her veil. Her friends cried out, some rushing to her side, others turning in shock toward Lyra. The crowd outside had seen enough. Voices rose. What has she done? Is this a curse? Why destroy the bride's crown? Lyra stood trembling, her chest heaving. For a moment she felt the thrill of power. Asha's face was pale, her joy shattered. Was this not what she wanted? To see her sister fall from grace? To tear away the perfection everyone adored? But then something stirred. A hush fell over the square. The torn veil fragments, which should have dropped uselessly to the floor, lifted instead. A wind, sudden and strong though no storm brewed, swept through the room. The pieces rose, swirling like pale birds. They twined together in midair, threads rejoining, shimmering brighter than before. Gasps erupted from inside and out. The veil, whole once more, drifted down toward Asha. But not as it had been. Now it glowed faintly, golden threads woven among the silver, as though the fire of the sun had kissed the moonlight. The wind pressed it gently against Asha's face, wrapping it around her head and shoulders. She lifted her hands in awe, not to hold it in place but to feel its warmth. Her eyes shone behind the fabric, radiant and calm. The villagers fell to their knees, voices whispering. The spirits? They protect her. She is chosen. Lyra's triumph curdled into horror. Her hands still clutched the torn fragments, yet the veil lived on her sister, untouched, more beautiful than before. The power she had tried to destroy had rejected her, choosing instead to reveal Asha's grace to the whole village. Asha lowered her gaze, not in pride but in humility. She touched the veil softly. It was never mine alone, she whispered. The wind has returned it. Lyra backed away trembling. Shame burned her cheeks hotter than any fire. The whispers of the villagers grew louder, not in her favor but against her. The drums resumed, not for her, never for her, but for the bride, the one the wind itself had crowned. The drums echoed like thunder through the square, but to Lyra, they were a sentence of doom. Each beat seemed to pound into her chest, driving home the truth. She had tried to ruin her sister, but the spirits had lifted Asha higher instead. The villagers crowded closer, their voices rising in a wave of condemnation. She tried to curse the bride. She mocked the blessings. No one who tears a veil is innocent. Lyra's face burned crimson. She wanted to shout back, to explain, to claim it had only been jealousy, only a moment of madness. But the words tangled on her tongue. She had torn the veil with her own hands, there was no denying that. Asha stood a few steps away, her veil glowing faintly as the morning sun caught its threads. She did not speak, but her silence was heavier than accusation. She looked at her stepsister with eyes that held no hatred, only sorrow. And that sorrow struck Lyra harder than any whip. The elders emerged from the crowd, their walking sticks thumping against the earth. Their long cloaks brushed the ground as they formed a circle around the sisters. The eldest among them, a woman whose hair was white as frost, lifted her hand for silence. The murmurs of the crowd faded to a tense hush. "Lyra, daughter of this house," the elder said, her voice carrying the weight of generations, "why have you done this? A bride's veil is sacred. To tear it is to tear the trust of the ancestors." Lyra swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. "I wanted to be seen. Always it is her. Her kindness, her beauty, her grace. And me? Invisible. I thought if I took the veil from her, if I shamed her, the village would see me instead." Her confession hung in the cold air. Asha's friends muttered in disgust. Mothers pulled their children closer, whispering warnings. This is what envy does. The elder's eyes were unyielding. "And what do you see now?" Lyra looked down. The fragments of the veil she had torn no longer lay in her hands, they had vanished into the wind. She had nothing left, not even the proof of her spite. The only veil that remained shimmered on Asha's brow, a sign that the spirits had chosen her. "I see that I am nothing," Lyra whispered, though the words hurt her throat like thorns. The elder shook her head. "You are not nothing. You are less because you sought to take what was not yours. But perhaps in your shame you may yet learn." The villagers murmured their agreement. Some demanded punishment. Banish her. Let her walk without shoes for 7 days. Let her sweep every hearth as a servant. Lyra's stomach churned. Punishment, exile, anything would be better than this. Standing in the center of the square, with every eye on her, her name blackened, her envy laid bare. She covered her face with her hands, wishing she could sink into the earth. Asha stepped forward. The glowing veil framed her face, her eyes soft as she looked at her stepsister. "Do not send her away," she said quietly, though every word carried. "Let her stay. A heart that envies needs to live among those who forgive, not wander alone in bitterness." The elders studied Asha for a long moment, then nodded. "The bride has spoken. Mercy is given. But know this, Lyra, mercy does not erase shame. It lives with you until you choose to change." A murmur rippled through the crowd, softer now, touched by the bride's compassion. Some nodded in respect. Others shook their heads, believing Lyra undeserving. But none could deny that the wind had chosen Asha as its voice, and her words carried weight. Lyra fell to her knees, the stone of the square biting into her skin. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Forgive me." Asha reached out a hand but did not touch her. "Forgiveness is a door," she said gently. "You may step through, but only if you leave envy behind." The villagers turned their eyes back to the bride. The drums resumed, steadier this time, guiding her toward the waiting groom. The procession continued, as if the spirits themselves demanded that joy must not be delayed by malice. Lyra remained kneeling, her body small before the crowd. The shame clung to her like a second skin, heavier than iron. She had tried to strip her sister of honor, but instead, she had stripped herself of dignity. As Asha walked forward, the veil flowing behind her in the morning breeze, the people whispered her name with reverence. And when they looked at Lyra, they saw not a rival, not a sister, but a warning. The humiliation was complete. The village square swelled with music and voices as the procession carried on, yet a hush of reverence clung around Asha. The veil on her face shimmered faintly, as if it were not cloth at all but a living thing, woven from threads of air and light. Each step she took seemed to carry with it a breath of wind, cooling the cheeks of those who stood too close to the fires, rustling the garlands strung across poles, stirring the hair of children who reached out to touch her as she passed. The elders followed behind, their staffs tapping the earth in rhythm with the drums, their eyes sharp. They had seen omens before, birds flying against storms, rivers that turned back on themselves, but never had they seen cloth torn and then restored by the will of unseen spirits. The veil became more than fabric that morning. It became a sign. As the bride reached the edge of the square where her groom waited, the wind rose again, circling her like a crown. The villagers gasped as the veil shifted. It no longer hung heavy across her face, it floated outward, forming a halo around her head. Strands of light danced across its surface, weaving shapes too fleeting to name: a bird, a tree, a spiral of stars. Each figure glowed and then vanished, as if the ancestors themselves whispered blessings through the air. "Sacred winds," one elder murmured, bowing low. "The breath of those who came before us." The groom, a tall and steadfast man named Kieran, lowered his gaze in awe. He reached out, not to claim her, but to steady himself, as though the force of what he witnessed was greater than his own strength. Asha, beneath the veil, closed her eyes. She could feel it too. The air was no longer empty. It carried voices. Not loud, not harsh, but soft as sighs. "Child of sorrow. Child of patience. You have been chosen, for the wind does not shield those whose hearts are heavy with malice." Her breath caught and her chest warmed. The veil brushed against her lips like a caress, sweet as a mother's hand. She remembered the moment it had been torn, the sharp sound of fabric splitting, her heart breaking with it. And yet now the very same threads glowed with life. The spirits had taken what was ruined and made it stronger. Behind her, Lyra trembled where she still knelt. Though the crowd no longer jeered, she felt every whisper like a lash against her back. She too saw the veil's glow. For her, the sight was not a blessing but a wound. It was proof that the spirits had turned from her. Where she had tried to bring shame, they had crowned her sister with glory. The elder with frost-white hair stepped forward, lifting her arms to the sky. "People of bright waters, witness the will of the unseen. The veil is no longer cloth but covenant. No hand of envy shall touch it again, for it belongs to her who was chosen." The villagers echoed the word, "Chosen, chosen," until it seemed the entire square breathed as one. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed, watching the veil shimmer like a second sun. Old men bowed low, muttering prayers that the winds might also bless their houses. Asha opened her eyes. The veil's glow dimmed slightly, settling once more across her features. But it no longer seemed fragile or delicate. It pulsed with quiet strength, a reminder that beauty can be remade from ashes, that grace can rise even from cruelty. Kieran stepped closer, his hands trembling as he lifted a garland of flowers to place around her neck. The petals trembled too, though no one touched them. The wind stirred them gently as if approving. He looked into Asha's eyes and whispered, so only she could hear, "The spirits honor you. How can I be worthy?" She smiled softly. "By walking beside me, not ahead." The crowd erupted in cheers as the garland settled against her shoulders. Yet even as celebration swelled, the air held a solemnity that none could deny. The veil had marked this union as more than a marriage between two souls. It was a joining between the living and the unseen, the village and its ancestors, the fragile and the eternal. And so the feast began with laughter, music, and dancing. Yet everywhere Asha walked, the veil stirred, reminding the people of what they had witnessed. The sacred winds had chosen her, and through her, they spoke. Far at the edge of the square, Lyra bowed her head, the weight of her shame pressing her down. But in the back of her mind a whisper lingered, not from spirits but from her own restless heart. If the winds chose her, what place is left for me? The night would bring no answers. The sacred winds had crowned their bride, and the village would never forget it. The village square glowed beneath lantern light as the wedding rites began. Though it was evening, the veil around Asha shimmered faintly, like dawn lingering on her face. Every villager pressed closer, eager to witness what was no longer just a marriage, but a story that would be told for generations. The elders gathered in a half-circle around the couple. Drums slowed, voices softened, and silence spread like a blanket. Kieran stood beside Asha, tall and steady, his hands folded with respect. Though he had known her as kind and gentle, tonight he looked at her with new eyes. She was no longer only the girl who fed the hungry and soothed the sick. She was the one whom the winds themselves had chosen to protect. The chief elder raised a carved staff high. "By tradition we ask, who stands as witness for the bride?" A hush followed. Normally it would be the mother or sister who stepped forward. But Asha's mother was long buried, and her stepsister was shunned after her cruel act. The crowd shifted uneasily. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then to everyone's surprise a child darted forward, a small boy with thin arms and bright eyes. He had often lingered by Asha's door, hungry for scraps she never failed to share. Now he stood tall before the elders. "I will speak," he said. His voice quavered, but his gaze was steady. "She has fed me when I had no bread. She has clothed me when I was cold. Who else should stand for her but one she saved?" The crowd murmured in awe. The elder nodded gravely. "So it shall be." The poor bear witness to the rich in spirit. Asha's heart swelled. Tears glistened beneath her veil, and the wind stirred again, lifting the edges as if to kiss her cheeks. The rites began. Bowls of water were brought, reflecting starlight. Fire was lit in the center, smoke curling upward like a prayer. The groom dipped his hands in the water, then held them over the flames, swearing to keep her safe in both abundance and scarcity. Asha mirrored him, her hands steady, her voice clear. "As the winds guard me, so shall I guard our home." The veil shifted again, wrapping lightly around both their faces as they spoke. Gasps rose from the crowd. It was as though the spirits themselves sealed the vow. The feast followed, lively and long. Drums thundered, feet stamped, songs rose high. Goats were roasted, bread broken, bowls of spice stew passed from hand to hand. Yet every eye returned again and again to the bride. Wherever she moved, the veil shimmered faintly, stirred by breezes no one else felt. Children giggled and reached for it, their fingers brushing its edges like they might a rainbow. Kiran's mother approached her new daughter-in-law, bowing low. "You are more than a bride," she said softly. "You are blessing made flesh. May our home never lack the winds of grace." The people echoed her words in their own way. Some pressed tokens into Asha's hands, beads, carved wood coins. Others simply touched her arm as she passed, whispering prayers that some of her blessing might rub onto them. But not all eyes were filled with reverence. At the far edge of the gathering, Lyra sat in the shadows, her face pale and hard. Each laugh and cheer cut her like a blade. She had dreamed of standing where her sister stood now, bathed in glory, the center of every gaze. Instead, she crouched unseen, the mark of shame heavy on her shoulders. She clenched her fists. The winds may favor her now, she thought bitterly, but winds change. And when they turn, where will her veil be then? The night wore on, joy spilling into every corner of the square. The couple received blessing after blessing, yet Asha never once let pride fill her heart. Beneath her veil, she whispered thanks to the unseen guardians who had restored her honor when all seemed lost. And as the stars wheeled overhead, the villagers whispered among themselves, this was no ordinary wedding. This was the wedding of the veil, the night the winds themselves bent low to crown a bride. While the village rejoiced in music and firelight, one house remained cold with silence. Inside, the stepmother sat rigid by the hearth, her jaw clenched, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl until the threads began to fray. Every beat of the drums from the wedding square carried through the walls, taunting her. Her daughter, Lyra, returned long after the feasting had begun. She slipped inside like a shadow, her cheeks flushed with shame and anger. For a moment she said nothing, only dropped onto a stool and stared at the floor. "Well?" her mother demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. Lyra shook her head. The veil returned to her. The wind wrapped it around her again in front of everyone. "They call her blessed now. They say the spirits guard her." The stepmother's lips curled in disgust. "Spirits," she spat. "Foolish superstition. She tricked them somehow. That girl has always been sly." But beneath her defiance, fear gnawed. She had seen things too, the shimmer of the veil, the way it clung to Asha as if alive. It was no trick of cloth. Something greater had claimed her stepdaughter, and the thought curdled her stomach. Lyra leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Mother, the people believe she is chosen. They bow their heads when she walks past. Even the elders stood in silence before her." She bit her lip. "What if the winds curse us for what we did?" The stepmother slapped the table, making the clay bowl rattle. "No curse can touch us unless we allow it. Do you not see? The more they raise her up, the more dangerous she becomes. Soon she will wield power in this village. She will take everything from us, respect, inheritance, a place by the fire. If we do not act, we will be nothing." Her voice dropped to a whisper, hard and cold. "She must be brought down." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lyra's hands trembled. She had always followed her mother's commands, but now doubt clawed at her. "But, mother, we tried once. And the wind itself protected her. If we try again," she shuddered. "What if it destroys us instead?" The stepmother leaned forward, her eyes burning. "Then we must be cleverer than the wind. Fire, not air, is what rules this house. Fire obeys those who feed it. Fire does not choose between daughters, it devours what it is given." Her words slithered like poison. Lyra turned away, unease rising in her chest. Yet part of her heart still yearned for revenge, for the place of honor she had lost. She nodded slowly, though her stomach churned. That night, as the wedding fires blazed in the square, the stepmother sat in the shadows of her own hearth, staring into the flames. She imagined the veil burning, curling into ash, leaving her stepdaughter stripped of her so-called blessing. The vision filled her with grim satisfaction. Meanwhile, across the village, Asha lay beside her new husband. The veil rested lightly on her face, stirred by the faintest breeze that slipped through the window. Though her heart was full of peace, she felt a shiver run through her body, as though unseen eyes watched her in the dark. The winds whispered against the roof, warning and restless. The stepmother, awake long into the night, fed the fire more wood, her shadow leaping on the walls. In her mind she vowed, if the winds guard her, let them. But fire will not bow. Fire will strip her glory, and she will be nothing once more. The drums faded, the village slept, but in the stepmother's house, fury smoldered hotter than the hearth flames. The veil had returned once. But would it survive fire? The morning after the wedding, the village still carried the echo of celebration. Children sang fragments of songs, elders sat with warm smiles, and the newlyweds received gifts at their door. Asha's veil, luminous as ever, floated gently as if alive, glimmering in the sunlight. But in the stepmother's heart, rage smoldered. She could not endure the sight of villagers bowing before her stepdaughter as though she were a saint. That evening, she approached Asha and her husband with a voice honeyed with false concern. "Daughter," she said smoothly, "our hearth has gone cold since last night's feast. Will you come light it for us as a bride brings blessings to her family's home? It would honor us greatly." Asha's heart was tender, she did not hear the venom behind the words. She nodded, smiling softly. "Of course, mother. A bride carries warmth to every corner she belongs to." Her husband hesitated, but Asha squeezed his hand. "I will not be long." Inside the stepmother's house, the fire had already been stoked into a hungry blaze. Lyra sat in the corner, pale and trembling. She could not look her stepsister in the eye. The veil shimmered faintly as Asha bent to greet the fire. "Place your veil upon the flame," the stepmother commanded, her tone sharp but cloaked in ceremony. "It is our custom, ashes to bind you to our hearth. As mine once bound me." Asha hesitated. She had never heard of such a ritual. Yet the stepmother's voice carried a weight of false authority, and Lyra's silence gave it strength. Slowly, Asha touched the edge of her veil to the fire. Flames leapt eagerly, devouring the cloth. The stepmother's eyes gleamed in triumph. Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. For a moment, it seemed the veil would vanish, consumed like any ordinary fabric. But then, the fire changed. The flames curled inward, threads of gold weaving where smoke should have risen. Instead of burning away, the veil transformed, each ember stitching it stronger, brighter. Ash fell to the floor not as dust, but as glittering sparks that melted into honey-colored drops. The veil, reborn in radiance, slid back onto Asha's face. It shimmered brighter than before, glowing with an otherworldly fire that belonged not to destruction, but to creation. The villagers, drawn by the flicker of unnatural light, gathered at the doorway. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She offered her veil to the fire, and it returned. "The spirits favor her. Blessed child of the winds and flame." The stepmother's triumph turned to horror. She stumbled back, her face pale, her hands trembling. "No. This cannot be." Asha straightened, the veil gleaming upon her. She looked at her stepmother, sorrow in her eyes. "You wanted to strip me of what was given. But blessings cannot be stolen, nor destroyed. They return to where they belong." Lyra broke into sobs. She fell to her knees before her sister, crying out, "Forgive me. I followed her, I believed her lies, but I see now, we were wrong. The spirits have chosen you, not us." The villagers' voices grew louder, some with awe, others with anger. Fingers pointed toward the stepmother. She sought to curse her own daughter. She fed lies into the hearth. She tried to burn what the spirits had given. The stepmother tried to defend herself, her voice shrill. "She bewitched the fire. She is no bride, she is a witch." But the people did not listen. Their eyes were fixed on Asha, radiant as she stood with the veil that shimmered like woven sunlight. At that moment, a gust of wind swept through the doorway, feeding the fire. The flames bent toward Asha as if bowing. The veil stirred, glowing with threads of both wind and flame. The crowd fell silent. Even the stepmother could not speak. The elements themselves bore witness. Asha's voice rang clear, I will not return harm for harm. Let the fire that tried to consume me instead teach us all. Envy destroys, but blessings multiply when given in love. Her words sank into the hearts of all who heard. The stepmother stood frozen, her schemes burned to ash. Lyra wept openly, clutching her sister's hands. And the villagers knew they had seen a trial not of men, but of the spirits themselves. Asha, veiled in gold and fire, walked out of that house with the crowd following in reverence. Behind her, the stepmother's hearth went cold, its flames extinguished, leaving only smoke curling in the air, smoke that smelled faintly of bitterness. Years passed. Seasons shifted, winters melted into springs and springs ripened into harvests. The village changed, new houses rising, children growing into parents, parents into elders. Yet one story never faded, the tale of the girl whose veil was torn, and how the wind and fire chose her as their own. Asha lived not as a queen or ruler, but as a matriarch of quiet strength. With her husband, she raised children who learned early that envy is a fire that consumes its bearer. The veil, still bright as the day it was restored, hung in her home above the hearth. It was no ordinary cloth. When the wind passed through the house, it would ripple softly, and on the darkest nights, threads of light glimmered within it. The villagers called it the veil of blessing. Brides came to kneel before it, touching their foreheads to the floor, whispering prayers for marriages of love and loyalty. Mothers brought their daughters to see it, warning them, "Do not let envy soil your hearts, for it blinds the eyes and poisons the soul." Lyra, the stepsister once consumed by jealousy, never left the village. Shamed, yes, but not abandoned. She lived with her mistakes etched into memory. Yet Asha did not banish her. Instead, she allowed her to live close by, giving her work, giving her chances to heal. Over time, Lyra softened. She never fully escaped her past, for whispers followed her wherever she went, but she bore them in silence. She raised her own children with gentleness, often telling them, "Do not repeat my path. Envy makes you reach for what will never belong to you. Love what is yours and blessings will find you." As Asha grew older, her wisdom became sought after beyond the village. Strangers traveled to hear her counsel, bringing gifts of salt, wool, and carved wood. They spoke of the legend spreading across valleys, a bride whose veil was torn by cruelty but restored by the spirits, proving that what is blessed cannot be broken. Children especially loved the story. On long winter nights, they would gather by the fire, wide-eyed, as elders retold it. They listened eagerly for the moment when the wind, soft yet mighty, wrapped the torn veil back around her face, and when the fire, meant to consume it, instead stitched it with golden thread. Some children would whisper to each other, "If I am kind, perhaps the wind will protect me too." Others would say, "If I speak truth, maybe the fire will bless my hands." And so the legend shaped not only memory, but the spirit of generations. When Asha's hair turned silver and her steps slowed, she would sit by the hearth and hold the veil in her lap. Her grandchildren would climb around her, tugging at her sleeves. "Tell us again, grandmother. Tell us about the veil." She would smile, her eyes crinkling like folded silk. And she would begin. There was a girl who was given a veil, light as wind and strong as truth. But her sister, blinded by envy, tore it away. The girl thought she had lost everything. Yet when she stepped outside, the wind itself came to her, wrapping her in what was hers. For what is true cannot be taken. Her voice always grew softer at the end. And when the fire tried to burn it, it became brighter still, because blessings, children, do not vanish, they return and they multiply. The children would fall quiet, staring at the veil's golden shimmer. Some would reach for it with tiny fingers, but Asha would only let them touch its edges, reminding them gently, "It is not mine alone. It belongs to the village. To you. To every soul who believes in truth over envy." One autumn evening, when the first frost painted the field silver, Asha passed away in her sleep. Her face was peaceful, as though she were only resting. The village mourned her deeply, but they did not bury her veil. Instead, they carried it through the streets during her funeral, the wind tugging at it, lifting it gently as if in farewell. When they laid her to rest, they placed the veil above the hearth of the gathering hall, where all could see it. From that day on, it became the heart of the village. No wedding began until the bride stood beneath it. No feast was complete until the elders reminded the young of Asha's tale. And no quarrel was resolved without someone whispering, "Remember the veil. Remember what envy destroys." Generations later, the story still lived. Travelers carried it to distant lands, changing its words but never its heart. Some said the veil was spun from sunlight itself. Others claimed it was the work of the wind maidens. But all agreed, It was proof that truth cannot be stolen and blessings cannot be destroyed. And when the wind blew across the village lake, villagers swore they could see a woman's figure, silver-haired, smiling as the veil rippled in the air. Asha, the bride who was once torn down but rose again, eternal in the memory of her people. The final lesson carved into every heart: envy devours but blessings endure.